All right, this is Numbers 34 in the Prager Rational Bible. Let's begin. It's going to be a long essay in this video, so bear with me. All right, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Instruct the Israelite people, and say to them, When you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as your portion, the land of Canaan with its various boundaries. So, the section is the future borders of the land of Israel. So God now delineated the boundaries of the promised land. While some interpret this as a morally troubled example of ordained expansionism, the fact is that these boundaries precisely do the opposite. They were meant to prevent the Jewish people from trying to conquer additional territory in order to expand their boundaries. As Gordon Wenham notes, the limits of the promised land of Canaan are defined. End quote. And God is not interested in creating an empire, but in setting up a limited place where the people will live in accordance with His will. And as Timothy Ashley noted, this passage presents a fairly accurate picture of the land of Canaan as found in Near Eastern texts from the middle of the 15th century BC and so on. It matches particularly well with the territory in the Egyptian district of Canaan in the second half of the 13th century BC. And the Talmudic and biblical scholar Rabbi Adon Steinschultz, however we say that, he said this. In practice, Israel was never in control of the entire area described in this chapter. There were always enclaves inhabited by foreign nations, some of which the Israelites did not attempt to conquer, but nevertheless, in the era of David and Solomon, the border of Israel reached the northernmost edge mentioned here and extended even further. However, a full conquest of all the territory included in the borders of the land. It was never carried out. And that comes from that guy's book, Adon Steinschultz, the Steinschultz Humash. Alright, then Gordon Wenham further explicates. Canaan, as defined here, is a much larger area than Israel ever settled, and David controlled most of Canaan and most of the Transjordan as well. But the land defined here does not correspond to Israel's actual boundaries at any time in her history. The land described here is therefore an ideal territory promised by God to the people of Israel, but is never fully occupied by them. But the fact that the land as defined here in Numbers 34 does correspond to the geographical entity of Canaan as known from the Egyptian texts from the 14th through the 13th centuries BC is a clear sign of the antiquity of this section. So basically showing that this scripture is pretty old. Alright, the southern border. 3. Your southern sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin alongside Edom. Your southern border shall start on the east from the tip of the Dead Sea, and your boundary shall then pass south of the ascent of Akrabim, and continue to Zin, and its limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea, reaching Hazar Adar, and continuing to Asmon. And from Asmon the boundary shall turn towards the Wadi of Egypt and terminate at the sea. So the southern border begins at the southern boundary of the Dead Sea, and it proceeds westward approximately through the center of the modern-day Negev, which is like the southern area close to the Sinai Peninsula. Yep, and the western border. From the western boundary you shall have the coast of the Great Sea, so that shall serve as your western boundary. And of course the Great Sea would be the Mediterranean Sea. The Israelites did not dislodge the Philistines from this land during the period of the Hebrew Bible. Alright, then the northern border. This shall be your northern boundary. Draw a line from the Great Sea to Mount Hor, and from Mount Hor draw a line to Lebo Hamath, and let the boundary reach Zedad. And the boundary shall then run to Zephron and terminate at Hazar Enon, and this shall be your northern boundary. So the Mount Hor mentioned here is not the Mount Hor in the south where Aaron died. This Mount Hor is the region of southern Lebanon. And Lebo Hamath, it means entrance into Hamath, which is generally identified with Lebwe, which is a village in southern Lebanon. And Zedad is near Lebwe, and Zephron and Hazar Enon are not precisely identifiable. So I guess we don't really know where those two were. Yeah, but somewhere up there, like Lebanon, probably southern Lebanon. Yeah, somewhere up there. Alright, and then the eastern border. For your eastern boundary you shall draw a line from Hazar Enon to Shephem. And from Shephem the boundary shall descend to Riblah on the east side of Ain. And from there the boundary shall continue downward and Abut on the eastern slopes of the Sea of Chinneroth. And the boundary shall then descend along the Jordan and terminate at the Dead Sea, and that shall be your land as identified by its boundaries on all sides. So other than the western border, the other borders are not entirely clear. Some of the places mentioned cannot be identified, but we can draw an approximate map. And according to Steinsaltz, the expanse of Israel as depicted here includes the modern-day state of Israel as well as the modern-day Syria. And conversely, according to certain opinions, the borders delineated in this chapter do not include the southern Negev, which is part of the state of Israel. Alright, now you get to the long essay. Oh boy. Yep. This is going to take up a good chunk of the rest of the video. Alright. Verse 13, Moses instructed the Israelites, saying, "This is the land you are to receive by lot as your hereditary portion, which the Lord has commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes." Alright, so the essay, is there luck in life, or is everything determined by God's will? Well, the Bible says, yeah, God does whatever he pleases in heaven and on earth, and his counsel shall stand. And of course, there's definitely debates about this stuff. And I guess he's going to offer some viewpoints. Alright, but I'll see what he has to say. I don't know if I'll agree, but I'll see what he's got to say. The allocation of land among the Israelite tribes was to be determined by lot. A restatement of Numbers 26:56, which reads, each portion shall be assigned by lot, whether for larger or smaller groups. So the meaning appears to be clear. A lot, or lottery, to use a more modern term, meaning the luck of the draw would determine where each tribe settled. Now many religious commentators, however, do not believe that random chance, or luck, determined the result, because their theology says that God is in charge of all that happens. Therefore, in their view, it is God who determined the result. I think in Proverbs it says the lot is cast, but every decision is of the Lord. Now what we may think of as luck or chance or coincidence, God doesn't see it that way. All right. But this raises one of the most complex and important issues of life. Is there luck in life, or is everything determined by God's will? Those who deny this lottery was determined by random chance do so because many religious people find it theologically unacceptable that luck plays any role in life. And for many religious people, if God is in control of the universe, luck can never be determinative. If luck ever rules, then God doesn't rule. And as a prominent American Christian writer R.C. Sproul famously put it, if there's one maverick molecule in all the universe, then God is not sovereign. And if God is not sovereign, he is not God. All right, okay. And that's from R.C. Sproul's book, Chosen by God. Yeah, it came out in 1986. I guess published by Tyndale House. And I think that says Carroll Stream, Illinois, I guess, where it was published. All right. Similarly, the Jewish Bible commentator, the Malbim, 1809 to 1879, commenting on this verse, and Proverbs 16:33, lots are cast into the lap, but the decision depends on the Lord. And this commentator writes that the latter part of Proverbs means the decision that comes out is not a coincidence, just as in the lottery about the division of the land, where lottery was under God's judgment. This is Prager's translation from the Hebrew of that verse. And in the Malbim's view, and in the view of most Jewish and Christian commentators, the lottery here in Numbers was determined by God and not by chance. But Prager's not going to agree with this. Though reason leads me to believe otherwise, there's no knowable answer to the question of whether God directs everything or whether luck determines everything, or anything, and no one assumes luck determines everything, and no one who believes in God assumes God directs nothing. There are problems with both views. And the primary religious problem with the belief that luck determines anything in people's lives is that it diminishes God's role in what happens to people. It therefore seems to deny the widespread religious belief that God is in control. In addition, there's an emotional problem. It's difficult for many people to accept that suffering is the result of random chance or bad luck. It is more comforting to believe that God has caused their suffering, or for that matter, good luck, even if we cannot understand why. But on the other hand, there's two very difficult problems with assuming that God determines everything and luck plays no role in life. One is that if God determines everything, well, then human beings do not have free will. And of course, there's debate even in Christian circles about sovereignty and free will and all that stuff. But anyway, And the other is that it makes God responsible for every bad thing that happens. And take the proverbial example of the drunk driver who crashes into another car and kills all the members of a family. The family did nothing whatsoever to cause the crash. Was the crash then caused by bad luck or by God? And if God willed it, the drunk driver was the tool God used to kill all the members of that family. And that means God, for some inscrutable reason, wished to kill all the members of that family. And B, the drunk driver had to kill that family. And those who deny a roll of luck and ascribe everything to God may respond that whereas conclusion A is correct, God caused that family to die at that time, conclusion B is not. That basically God allowed that family to die, caused it, but he's not responsible for the drunk driver doing it. The drunk driver did have a choice whether to drive after drinking too much, but once he made that choice, God used him to kill the family God wanted dead. And presumably, according to this thinking, since God wanted to kill all the members of that family at that time, he would have found another way to do so by causing a mechanical failure, somehow distracting the driver, or some other way. And those who hold God responsible for everything would deny that terrible luck played any role in the deaths of the approximately 60 million Chinese peasants who Mao Zedong starved to death and murdered in other ways. God chose each and every one of them to die, and during the bubonic plague in Europe in the mid-1300s, known as the Black Death, God killed every one of the 40 to 50 million people who died. Whether anyone lived or died had nothing to do with luck. And when the Islamic terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans on September 11, 2001, God specifically chose each one of those individuals to die that day. And of course, God marked each one of the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis for death. And as the reader can likely infer, this is not my belief. One reason I do not hold this belief is because it depicts God as a capricious dealer of death and suffering. Yet in the argument between God and Abraham over the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Torah itself establishes that God is not capricious. Of course not. Rather, the judge of all the earth acts justly. But if God is both just and the creator of all suffering is just. And this idea seems to contradict everything the Torah and the rest of the Bible stand for. Why, for example, would the Torah instruct us to this commandment, justice you shall pursue, Deuteronomy 16:20, if everything is already just? And if the book of Job is correct in saying God does not act wickedly or pervert justice, those who ascribe anything to God's will would have to conclude that wickedness and injustice do not exist. There's a footnote there. That's Job 34:12. And of course, that's when Elihu was talking to Job. But there is nothing about life more self-evident than that there is an enormous amount of injustice in our world. And moreover, the belief that God is responsible for all evil also runs counter to post-biblical Judaism as well. And the normative view of evil in the Talmud is that everything is in the hands of heaven except fear of heaven. In Talmud, Barakot 33b. Yeah, I don't know. That's just the citation. But that means everything is in God's hands except whether or not people obey God. And as noted, the other reason I do not deny the role of random chance and do not ascribe everything to God's intervention is that this view deprives man of free will. In the case of murder, for example, God intervened to have someone commit murder and intervened to have someone murdered. Nevertheless, it is understandable why so many people want to hold to that belief. For one thing, to believe that bad luck or good luck is often determinative is depressing. And the idea that multitudes of people suffered horribly and unjustly because of random chance, for most religious people, is less comforting than the belief that God, as much as we cannot understand why, has willed all of that suffering. And I kind of like how Frank Turek, deals with this question, the apologist, who was good friends with Charlie Kirk. But he basically makes an argument, something called the ripple effect. That even though something bad may happen, we can't understand why God allowed it, but it could ultimately ripple forward into something good. Like the story with Joseph. Brothers sell him into slavery, gets falsely accused, but then, of course, he gets elevated after he interprets Pharaoh's dream, puts all the food aside for the famine. Family comes during the famine to get food. Yeah, well, he tests them at first to see if the brothers changed, and they have. And ultimately, Joseph basically saves them during the famine. Yeah, and of course, Jacob and the family, they moved down to Egypt. And of course, in Genesis 50, Joseph tells the brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, to save your lives. Yeah. And I guess one of the reasons, we believe that, things happen, even good or bad, to God, according to God's will, is, maybe to, ripple forward into something good sometimes. Yep, of course, the greatest evil, God had the plan for Jesus to be crucified on the cross for our sins. God willed that even from the very beginning. Yeah, and that was a horrible evil that happened to Jesus. Yeah. But of course, the people who committed that evil against Jesus, they were still responsible for their decisions. So you still had the free will in play. Yep. So, again, don't know how to fully reconcile the two, but they're there. So, yeah, probably not able to fully reconcile, how can God be sovereign sometimes when you see all these bad things happen all the time. And I guess it's understandable maybe why Dennis would want to believe in luck, I guess, to explain some of this. It does, make sense, given all the suffering that happens in the world. So, but I do appreciate, what he's sharing, so. Alright. But considering the issue solely from an emotional perspective, would we rather live in a world where unjust suffering was the result of our having bad luck, or a world in which all unjust suffering were the result of divine will? And to the extent that the question is about emotions, there can be no correct answer. And I need to re-emphasize that I understand the desire to believe all suffering is God-induced. Although in Lamentations it says he doesn't afflict willingly. He takes no pleasure whenever people suffer. But I know in Romans 5, he allows suffering, especially for Christians, to basically build up our character. To make us more Christ-like. And then I even learned in the Gospels that even Jesus, he actually learned obedience through suffering. Even though, of course, he was perfectly obedient, being God. Sometimes those can be some of the reasons. Yeah. Or maybe that incident with the drunk driver, hitting the family. Yeah, we may not understand it, but what if that could ripple forward into maybe somebody getting saved? What if that drunk driver may end up hearing the gospel in prison or whatever, and maybe he gets saved? Yeah. If God knows everything and all things, then surely he would know what the good and the bad and the ugly could lead to in this world. Yeah, surely he would know, how all of that would unfold. He doesn't have to figure it out as he goes. Yeah, I don't believe that at all. He doesn't figure it out as he goes. He knows all of it. Yep. So, but of course, can't fully understand how it all works. How you can have the sovereignty and the free will again. But anyway. But maybe that ripple effect is one attempt to try to explain a little bit, but it may not be fully satisfactory, but it's a answer, I guess you could say. So, alright, but anyway, I need to get through this. So, then people can believe that there exists some transcendent reason for their and others' unjust suffering, even though they cannot know what the reason is. And on the other hand, if suffering is due to bad luck, there's no transcendent reason. All we can say is that's the way the ball bounces. It's just how it goes. Now, let me now consider the other related person many people do not... the other related reason, many people, persons, do not believe in random chance. They believe ascribing anything to random chance undermines the power and authority of God as expressed in the statement of R.C. Sproul. Now, before explaining why I do not believe God's power and authority are negated by belief in random chance, I want to add another potential problem with the religious rejection of the view that much suffering and success is the product of random chance. So there is a danger in holding this view. If all suffering is God-induced, why work to reduce it? And this has, in fact, been a problem in Eastern religion's doctrine of karma, which, of course, is not biblical, but anyway. But, of course, the belief is that one suffers in this life because of the bad deeds one committed in the previous life, and that's often led people to accept, or at the least, not fight unjust suffering because unjust suffering does not really exist. Under the law of karma, all suffering is just. And the Hindu caste system was largely rooted in this view. Those in the lowest caste, the elite, the people who suffered the most, were generally regarded as having merited their suffering. While it is true that the threat of being reincarnated as a suffering being, human or otherwise, can induce some people to treat the underclass with kindness, it does not generally succeed in doing so. While I do not hold the view that all suffering is somehow just, nor do I believe that God always wills it. And I have no desire to deprive people of a belief that provides comfort in the face of suffering. Nor is this said patronizingly. This belief is held by many of the finest and kindest people I know. And now I turn to the issue of God in control, though I believe most unjust suffering is the result of bad luck and much that is good health, financial well-being, good marriage, good children, at least partially is the result of good luck. I nevertheless fully affirm that God does govern the universe, and that God does not will everything that happens does not mean that God does not govern the world. And we need to distinguish between govern and control. God governs the world, but he does not necessarily control everything that happens. Yeah, well, I think there would be some disagreement here, especially like with the example of causing kingdoms to rise and fall, so he's sovereign over kingdoms. Yeah, even evil ones. But of course, they'll be judged too. So there's definitely the free will and responsibility. Yep. And I'm sure the Nazis definitely got judged, obviously. Yeah, and I'm sure Mao Zedong did too. Yeah. Even because, yeah, absolutely what they did was evil. Yep. Yep. And just because God may allow evil to happen, it doesn't mean that he's actually the author of evil. So, alright. So, is it not the case, at least as far as the Torah and the rest of the Bible is concerned that much of what human beings do is against God's will and therefore not controlled by God? Does God control or will people to disobey Him and then punish them for doing so? Does God will that human beings be so evil that He decided to destroy them all except for Noah and his family? Would He have destroyed humanity if everyone behaved as He willed them to? And for that matter, why would God punish anyone, including Israelites, for disobeying Him if God willed that disobedience? If then God does not control everything that happens, in what sense does God govern? And there are three senses in which God governs the world. The first way in which God governs the world is through the physical world. God created the universe and He continues to operate it because that is His will. And there's no rational explanation for the existence of the universe other than divine creation. I agree. And the second way in which God governs the world, for reasons I do not find fully scrutable, but sometimes the way He governs is sometimes He intervenes in the affairs of man. And I believe that for reasons only God knows, He chose Abraham and the Jewish people to be His messengers to mankind, and of course through whom the Messiah would come. And there's no rational explanation for the survival, not to mention the utterly disproportionate influence of the Jews other than divine intervention. Nor do I believe God intervenes only with regard to the Jews. My belief of how God governs the world is the same as that of the American fathers, not all of whom were conventionally religious. Yeah, but the American founders, they said God governs the world. And they frequently referred to that as, providence. Providence of God, basically, when He intervenes in human affairs sometimes. And the third way in which God governs the world is by judging every human being and nation. If God is just, and just is the first attribute ascribed to God in the Torah by Abraham, He must judge human conduct. And since there is little justice in this life, those judgments must be enacted in an afterlife. Whereas the belief that God wills everything to happen in this world, including all the unjust suffering, provides many religious people with some comfort. My comfort derives from the belief in the afterlife. Yeah, me too. Because ultimately all of what we would see as unjust suffering, and some of it is unjust because it comes at the hands of sinners, other sinners, doing that. What happened to Jesus was unjust. He didn't deserve it, ultimately, but He chose to endure it for our sakes. God can relate to this suffering. He's endured suffering for our sake. He can relate to this. And this provides me with an ability to acknowledge the existence of good and bad luck and still retain the ability to believe that God governs the universe. And therefore I have a solution to the oft-posed question. Given all the unjust suffering in the world, how can God then be omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and benevolent, all-good? If He is benevolent, then He cannot be omnipotent, and if He is omnipotent, then He cannot be benevolent. My solution is that this benevolent God has chosen not to exercise His omnipotence in order to allow our world to operate freely. And He allows both people and nature to operate without constant intervention. People can choose to do evil, hurricanes can wreak havoc, and cells can metastasize, and if God always intervened, life would be bereft of meaning. and human beings would be moral robots. God would prevent humans from doing anything against his will, and the laws of nature would not operate. God would ensure no one had cancer and no earthquakes occurred. Yep, and a few years before this commentary was written, a tragic event occurred in Teaneck, New Jersey. A large oak tree was felled by powerful windstorms, killing 2 Jewish men walking home from synagogue on Saturday night. What should God have done? Should he have suspended the laws of nature, such as gravity? And if he should have, shouldn't he usually do so? Why only for those 2 men? And we could assume many of the grieving families and friends of those 2 men found some comfort in the belief that God, for some unknowable reason, decided to have those 2 men die at that time. They may be right, but for reasons outlined in the essay, I believe that this was a tragedy that God did not direct. So then, what role, other than righting things in the afterlife, do I believe God plays in our lives? So the role that he plays is as our Father in heaven. He is with us when we suffer. I agree. And if anyone believes this, it could be a major source of comfort. We're not suffering alone. God grieves with us because he cares for and knows every one of us. Our lives are filled with ultimate meaning. For those of us who believe in God, this is enormously helpful and confronting suffering. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yeah, Psalm 23, that's a pretty good passage to refer to. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So, in my view, God plays other roles as well. He has given us a way to live, the Torah in general, and then the 10 Commandments in particular. If the world lived by the wisdom and moral principles of the Torah and observed the 10 Commandments, the world would be so much more beautiful than it has been, and that we would not be discussing the problem of unjust suffering, except with regard to natural suffering such as disease and falling trees, and a good world would surely conquer much of that suffering as well. Yeah. But of course, one of the big reasons why there's so much suffering in the world is because of the fall, our sin. And part of the natural disasters and all that stuff, or diseases basically, or trees falling, it's probably that Romans 8 passage, all of creation groans, basically waiting for the new creation. Because sadly it's been subjected to futility and all that because of the fall. It's a consequence of the fall, our sin and rebellion that ended up bringing all of the suffering in the world as a result of sin. But of course, if the ripple effect argument is true, then God can use all of the suffering or whatever to bring about good. Well, of course, Romans 8:28, he works together all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Yeah, definitely works things for good for believers, even if all things are not going to be good, and usually they're not going to be. Yep, and even if you got martyred, the ultimate good would come out of that because you would go to be with Christ immediately. So anyway. Alright, well, it probably can go on and on, but I need to get through this. So, all of which brings us back to the subject of this verse. The lot determined where each tribe would settle in the land of Israel. Was really the chance cast of the lot, or were the results determined by God? And I am convinced that it was a bona fide lot, meaning random chance determined where each tribe settled. Further, I am close to certain that God intended the Israelites to believe it was determined by lot, and that would only be a fair way to apportion the land. And if the Israelites believed that God, rather than lottery, determined where each tribe settled, it would have led to anger and resentment at God on the parts of the tribes who were not happy with where they were to settle. If, on the other hand, luck determined the outcome, people would have far more likely accepted the results without resentment, and they would have said what all of us say with regard to a lottery or roulette wheel: that's the way the ball bounces. To illustrate the point, imagine if people came to believe that God, rather than chance, determined the winners of a lottery. Would they be more or less likely to be at peace with the outcome than if the outcome were determined by pure chance? The answer should be obvious. This is why God wanted the results of the land, results of the land lottery here to be determined by chance. And if God determined the allotment of land in Israel, he would have said so. Reuben, your land is here. Simeon, yours is here, and so on. He would not have told the Israelites to conduct a lottery. All right, finally, verse 14. For the Reubenite tribe by its ancestral houses, the Gadite tribe by its ancestral houses, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have already received their portions. These 2.5 tribes have already received their portions across the Jordan opposite Jericho on the east side, the Orient side. So as related in Numbers 32, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh wish to remain in the Transjordan and not settle in Canaan. 16. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, These are the names of the men through whom the land shall be apportioned for you: Eleazar the priest, and Joshua son of Nun. Eleazar the high priest will be the primary spiritual leader, and Joshua the primary political and military leader, Moses' successor. Alright, Israel's divinely appointed leaders. And you shall also take a chieftain from each tribe through whom the land shall be apportioned. So the list of readers has only 10 names, since the tribes of Gad, Reuben were to remain on the other side of the Jordan. And of course, half of Manasseh would be on this Transjordan side, and then the other half would be in the land of Canaan. So I guess for that reason, you'll also get the leader for the Manassite tribe, since half will still be in the land of Canaan. Alright, so these are the names of the men. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. And then from the Simeonite tribe, Samuel, son of Ammihud. And then from the tribe of Benjamin, Elidad, the son of Cheslon. And from the Danite tribe, the chieftain, Buki, son of Jogli. From the descendants of Joseph, from the Manassite tribe, the chieftain Haniel, son of Ephod. From the Ephraimite tribe, a chieftain Kemuel, son of Ziphtah. And from the Zebulunite tribe, a chieftain Elisaphan, son of Parnach. From the Issacharite tribe, a chieftain Paltiel, son of Azon. And from the Azarite tribe, a chieftain Ahihud, son of Shelemai. And from the Naphthalite tribe, a chieftain Peduhel, son of Ammihud. And it was these whom the Lord designated to allot portions to the Israelites in the land of Canaan. Okay, well that's actually the end of Numbers 34. Long essay, but got through it. But it was a good one. Lord willing, I'll get to 35 another time, but until then, may God bless you in the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.